With the release of Christopher Nolan's latest blockbuster, Oppenheimer, the story of the scientist who developed the atomic bomb and then spent the rest of his life trying to prevent its use, many people are once again asking the big question: was the use of nuclear weapons on Japan ethical? It wasn't. Unlike so many things on this channel, the answer to this question is about as clear as it comes, with every single pope since Pius XII in agreement that the use of nuclear weapons is never allowed. What's a little less clear-cut, and in the news now with some recent controversial statements by Pope Francis, is whether even possessing nuclear weapons is ethical. What does the Church teach about weapons of mass destruction, and how has the conversation shifted in recent years? This is Catholicism in Focus. In 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing the death of well over 100,000 people. It is hard to come up with a more tragic event in all of human history. In 1948, Pope Pius XII called the nuclear bomb the most terrible weapon which the human mind has conceived up to date, and warned of the great destruction it would pose society in the future if ever used again. In his 1963 encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, Pope John XXIII stated with no ambiguity, nuclear weapons must be banned, as did Popes Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis. Statements like these have been frequent and without controversy for more than 75 years because the issue is without debate in the Catholic Church. There is never a situation in which dropping an atomic bomb on a populated area can be justified. The reason for this is twofold, both related to what is called the just war doctrine. I made a whole video about this a while back, but basically there are conditions that need to be met for acts of war to be initiated, and there are rules of conduct once fighting has begun. In the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there's no question as to whether war with Japan was justified, but the atomic bomb clearly violated two principles of the conduct within war. The first and most obvious is that of distinction. There's a big difference between soldiers carrying weapons and civilians going about their normal day. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches non-combatants, wounded soldiers, and prisoners must be respected and treated humanely. It goes on to quote the Second Vatican Council, stating, "Any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities of extreme area, along with their population, is a crime against God and man himself. It merits unequivocal and unhesitating condemnation." You can fight people on a battlefield, but leave the children and grandparents out of this. The second principle in question is that of proportionality. Basically, the amount of damage inflicted on human life and society has to be less than the advantage of attacking or the threat of inaction. Dropping a bomb on or near civilian areas with the hope of halting military production or communication may be justified. Dropping one with a 3-mile blast radius, obliterating everything in its wake, is unthinkable. Over the years, some have tried to argue that it was a necessary evil, that had the US not dropped the bombs, the war would not have ended as quickly and far more people would have died. A point that may or may not be true, but is ultimately irrelevant. For Catholic moral theology, a lesser of two evils is still an evil, and an evil can never be justified by the good that it produces. No matter how you twist it, intentionally killing about 200,000 people and leveling an entire society is never going to be a good thing, and the official church has taught this without hesitation for 75 years. Where there is a bit more ambiguity, and even controversy as of late, is what to do with the weapons we already have. Since the very first condemnations of nuclear bombs, popes have warned against the arms race and have called for disarmament. We should work towards a future when they are neither created nor possessed. But until full disarmament is possible, the idea of deterrence has proved to be an acceptable approach. As the logic goes, if the threat of nuclear war hangs over everyone's head, it may protect everyone from ever actually using one. Such was the stance of John Paul II in 1982, during the Cold War, in his speech to the United Nations. Even though he spent most of his time advocating for disarmament, he did state, deterrence based on balance, certainly not as an end in itself, but as a step on toward a progressive disarmament, may still be judged morally acceptable. The following year, the bishops of the United States followed suit, confirming in its pastoral letter on war and peace that it was a morally acceptable position. Possessing weapons of mass destruction for the sake of deterring others from using them was okay, at least with some reservations. The Catechism, published a decade later, captures the complexity of the situation. The accumulation of arms strikes many as a paradoxically suitable way of deterring potential adversaries from war. They see it as the most effective means of ensuring peace among nations. This method of deterrence gives rise to strong moral reservations. The arms race does not ensure peace. Far from eliminating the causes of war, it risks aggravating them. Spending enormous sums to produce ever new types of weapons impedes efforts to aid needy populations. It thwarts the development of peoples. Over-armament multiplies reasons for conflict and increases the danger of escalation. Basically, we don't think it's a good thing at all, and we recognize that it could have some catastrophic effects, but I guess it's the best we can do for right now. At least that was our stance up until a few years ago. Or maybe it still is. It's all very unclear. In 2017, speaking at a Vatican conference on nuclear disarmament, Pope Francis stated that even possessing nuclear weapons was damaging to society as they exist in the service of a mentality of fear that affects not only the parties in conflict, but the entire human race. For this reason, he concluded, the threat of their use, as well as their very possession, is to be firmly condemned. In other words, deterrence is not a viable option and should no longer be seen as an acceptable step towards disarmament. Just possessing an atomic bomb, even without planning to use it, is a sin against God and humanity. And so, for the past 6 years, he has worked from his position as Pope to make disarmament a reality. A leader in promoting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, he has continued to teach that even the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral and has called for the immediate disarmament of all nations. An approach that is not entirely new, as John Paul II clearly emphasized disarmament as a future goal, and yet with clarity and urgency not seen before by a pope. It is not enough to tolerate these evils for a time. The conditions today require change today. It's a situation that might seem reminiscent to Pope Francis's approach to the death penalty. While John Paul II spoke against the practice and believed it to be morally wrong, he left an exception open for its use. Pope Francis is simply closing that exception and bringing finality to the discussion. As of yet, his statements have not carried the full weight of his office, and he's done nothing to change the catechism or canon law, as he did with the death penalty. So the issue remains a question for the Church. Is this Pope Francis just speaking hyperbolically to change hearts, or is he changing the official teaching of the Church? In a way, the answer to both questions is no. He's not being bombastic for political gain or speaking casually, as can often be the case on airplanes. He's exercising his office as Pope to teach the Church, and so we should listen. At the same time, he's not changing the teaching of the Church formally or fundamentally. He's doing what every pope since World War II has done, which is emphatically condemn a weapon of mass destruction. The difference we see here is not of content, but of timing. We have always been on our way to disarmament. He's simply demanding that we get there quicker.